it takes a lot of effort. There's a lot of work that's involved. And that's what we want to talk about today, is how to be a good father. What is a good father? There used to be a television show called The Good Wife. I don't know if you saw that, but in the show, the father was not a very good father. He had done some horrible things. But I wonder if they made a television show called The Good Father. What would that be like? There used to be a show called, I think, Father Knows Best.
Yeah.
And people don't say that much anymore. But, don't say it at all, no. But what if they made one? What would it look like? Anyway, that's what we want to talk about today. And there's a verse in the Old Testament, it's in your notes there. It's Malachi 4, 5, and 6. I love this verse. It says, Behold, I will send you Elijah. This is God talking. Elijah the prophet, before the coming of the great and dreadful day of the Lord. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we talked about what the day of the Lord is. That's when Jesus returns. And so we're getting closer to that. And he will turn the hearts of the fathers to the children, and the hearts of the children to their fathers, lest I come and strike the earth with a curse. So here's the promise. If we as fathers do not turn our hearts to our children and our grandchildren, the promise is that the Lord is going to come and strike the earth with a curse. And I wonder if that's what's happening in our day. We need good fathers. And so we're going to talk about what that means today. Number one in your notes, a good father provides for his family. We're going to start off real basic here. 1 Timothy 5:8 says, But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever. So we as fathers, we have an obligation, a mandate, a command from the Lord that we need to provide for our families. Now, when I was way back in the 5th grade, I had a paper route. And paper route actually this neighborhood was part of it, because we lived a few blocks up the street here. Actually where Jay's restaurant is, they don't call it that anymore, it's some other name.
Grain station.
Grain station, thank you, Sean. And so I would have to get up early in the morning to get the papers ready, and so I would go down, I'd get the papers actually at Joe's gas station, which not there anymore either. And I bring them back to our house where it was warm, and I would get the papers ready. I'd put rubber bands around them in those days. And so I was doing that, and all of a sudden my dad came in the door. This was in the wee hours of the morning, and he was working at Mountain Fir Lumber Company, which was over in Independence. And he was working the graveyard shift, and he came in and he was visibly shaken. And I said, Dad, what are you doing home? You're supposed to be at work. He says, I just about lost my life. And he explained to me that he was down in a pit cleaning it out, and it was a pit with a conveyor belt that went into a chipper that would chip up all the bad wood. And he said, I was down there cleaning it out, and all of a sudden I looked up and he said there was a forklift and they were getting ready to dump a whole load of wood into the pit. And he said, the guy didn't see me. I called out, I yelled, he didn't see me. He says, just in the nick of time, I got out of that pit, and otherwise I would be dead. He said, I saw my life flash before my eyes, and he was visibly shaken. And I said, Dad, you need to quit that job. And you know what he said? He said, I would, but you know what? He says, we need this job so I can provide for this family. And jobs were tough back in those days to find, and he had graciously, by the grace of God, gotten that job. But he was willing to lay down his life, literally, to support our family. And that's what part of being a father is to support your family. And I'm sure we could all tell stories about how our fathers sacrificed to do that. Well, number two, and we're going to go through these. We've got about 8 points here today. We're going to go through them fairly quickly. We're not going to dwell on any one very long. So number 2, a good father is a spiritual leader. Now usually we think of moms as being a spiritual leader, and I think you women, there's something in you that is more receptive to spiritual things. I don't know why that is, but I think you just come by it more naturally than we do. But God, in His infinite sense of humor, wants men and husbands and fathers to be spiritual leaders as well. Ephesians 5:25 says, "Husbands, love your wives, just as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself up for her, so that He might sanctify her, having cleansed her by the washing of water with the word, that He might present to Himself the church in all her glory, having no spot or wrinkle or any such thing, but that she would be holy and blameless. So husbands ought to also love their own wives." And what this passage is saying is that fathers and husbands, just as Christ is the spiritual leader of the church, we as husbands are to be, and fathers are to be spiritual leaders in our families. And we're to share the word with them, the washing of the water of the word with our families. So you may have noticed that I have an older Bible with me today. And it's bigger than my regular Bible. And this is the Bible that was my father's. Now my father passed away a few years ago, and when he did, I requested that I get this Bible because this Bible means a lot to me. Because when I was a little kid, this Bible wasn't all tattered and worn, it was brand new. And there was even gold around the edges, a little gold plating that they used to do on the Bibles. And if you look real closely, there are tabs that have all the books of the Bible. So if you don't know where a book of the Bible is, like when you're a little kid and you want to know where Malachi is, you can just look on these tabs and you can turn right to it. And I was fascinated with this Bible, and I would see my father open this Bible on Saturday nights before he would teach a class at the church on Sundays. And he would study over this. And so when I got old enough to read, I knew where that Bible was. And I would go pick it up and I'd turn to it. And I noticed that in the margin, there were what we call cross references. Now, I didn't know what they were as a kid. They were just all these little verses. And so finally I figured out that there was a footnote that would reference these cross verses. And so I'd look up these verses and do that, just all in this Bible, all because I saw my father using it. And I want to encourage you men, you fathers, grandfathers, to let your kids, let your grandkids see you in the Word of God. That is powerful. It was powerful for me. It had an influence on my life, obviously, and it will on your kids and grandkids as well. Another thing about my father was that even though he wasn't always acting like a spiritual leader, he always insisted that we have prayer before meals. Even in his later years, and he got to the point where he didn't really attend church very often. But whenever we would get together as a family, he would insist that we have prayer. Whenever we would go out to dinner with him, he would lead us in a prayer before the meal. And that has spoken so much to me and still does today. And so anyway, we as fathers are to be spiritual leaders. Then number 3, a good father provides a nest for his wife. A nest for his wife and his children. Proverbs 14:1 says, "The wise woman builds her house, but the foolish tears it down with her own hands." Now it's interesting to me that in the Word of God, in Proverbs there, it singles out that a house in relationship to a wife, or a home in a relationship to a wife. As men, I don't think we can really comprehend how important a house and a home is to our wives. To us, it's a place to hang our hat. It's four walls. To the wife, to the woman, it's a nest. It has so much more significance than we realize. And I'm still learning this. But there was a lady in our church. We used to, when I was first in the ministry, we were in a church over in Florence on the coast. And there was an older lady in our church, and she told this story. She had been widowed by then, but she was reflecting back on her life. And she said that they were raising their kids, she and her husband, and they had raised them all in this house that they had lived in for several years. And that house had a lot of meaning to her. But she said one day, after the kids were all raised and all gone, her husband came home and he said, "Honey, I've got a great idea." He said, "Let's sell the house, let's buy a pickup and a camper, and let's just tour around the United States." And she was kind of excited about it. She got the vision, and so they went ahead and they got the house sold. And after the house sold, well, they had to move out. And so they had a garage sale or an estate sale, just like the Gordons are going to have next weekend. And so they all their furniture and all their belongings were out there on the front lawn. And it was a nice summer day like this. And people started coming and paying a little bit of money and were carrying away all these treasures that she'd had all these years. And she said she started to think about that. It kind of gripped her heart. And she thought, well, now these people can't nearly appreciate what all those things mean. And finally she stood up, and as she did, she felt lightheaded, and she just passed out right there on the ground. And people came over and said, "What's wrong? What's going on? Did you have a stroke?" And she says, "I don't know what's going on. I just have this lightheaded feeling." And in hindsight, she said, "I just saw all my treasures going away, and it overwhelmed me," she said. And then later that day, he brought the pickup and the camper, and they got in and they drove away. And she said, "I can still remember driving away from that house and the empty feeling that was in my heart." Because she said that was the place where we had raised our family. And she really never quite got over that. The same thing has happened in our house. Now, we built our own house. I've shared that with you over 30 years ago now. And when we finally got the house framed and the insulation was in the walls and the sheetrock was on the walls, it wasn't finished like this is nicely, it was just a bare sheetrock, I felt like my job was done. I felt like the house was finished. And my wife said, "No, it's not finished. We're just starting." And I said, "Well, I don't know, I'm done." I was so exhausted from the 3 years that we had spent just getting to that point. Well, she took over at that point, and she became the interior decorator. She became the finish carpenter. And if you've been in our house, she's done a great job. She put the pictures on the wall. I was happy with those nails in the wall that kind of looked like gunshots. Didn't matter to me because all I wanted was 4 walls. I didn't care if there were pictures on the walls or even what color they were or if there was carpet on the floor. Didn't matter to me, but it did to her. And like I say, I'm still learning this, but a good father provides a nest for his wife. And not only that, it becomes a pretty good investment over the years. If you stay in a house for 30 years, I guarantee you it will be worth more at the end than what you started. Now there's ups and downs in between. There's good times and there's bad. But and when you think about all the interest you pay on a mortgage and the property tax, then maybe it's not all that great of an investment, but what it is, it's a forced savings account. It forces you to save, and at the end of the road, you've got a nice bit of equity. So anyway, number 4, a good father helps his children succeed. Helps his children succeed. Jesus said in Matthew 7, "Or what man is there among you who if his son asks for bread, will give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will he give him a serpent? If you then, being evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? And so even Jesus pointed out that even though we have a sin nature, we want to do good things for our kids. We want them to succeed. It's instilled in us, or it should be. That's part of being a good father. Proverbs 22:6 says, train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart from it. And this word train, if you look that up in the Old Testament Hebrew, it's actually a word picture of, have you ever had a bean plant, maybe that grows in your yard, and you train it up on a trellis, and it will, once you get it started, it will crawl up that thing on its own. And it'll take it, but if you don't do that, it just kind of piles up on the ground and it's kind of a mess. It doesn't know where to go. But if you train it up, if you start swirling it around that pole, it will go ahead and climb up there. And the same thing is true with a child. If we train up that child, then in the beginning, when he is old, the promise is he will not depart from it. And I believe that this verse even goes a little bit further than that, in that you have to be careful with a bean plant that you kind of curl it up the way it's starting to go. Because if you curl it a different way, you can break the bean plant and it will die. And so with our children, I don't know if you've noticed this, those of you that have had more than one child, they're not all the same. Have you noticed that in your families? They're different. One of our sons just had their third child, and Ann spent some time with the little baby last night, and she came home and she said, you know, he's different from the other two. He looks completely different. And not only that, he will act differently. Each one is a little different. And as fathers, we need to take that into consideration. Because if you're like me, you thought that your kids were going to be just like you. That's what I thought. I thought, my kids, they'll have the same interests that I have. They'll be so involved in sports. They'll just love it, you know, like I did. And you know what? That wasn't necessarily true. That they all have different interests. And part of my journey as a father has been to figure out exactly what their bent is and to encourage that. I wanted my daughter to be a basketball player. And God, in His infinite wisdom, made her a little tiny petite person that when she was on the basketball team, she wound up being beat out by girls that were bigger and stronger. And finally, she came to me one day in high school, and she said, Dad, I'd rather not be on the basketball team anymore. She said, I'd rather be on the dance team. Yay. The dance team. I don't know anything about dancing. And it kind of threatened me, and it made me fearful because I thought I'm losing control here. But she got on that dance team, and she thrived. She loved it. That was her bent. And now she has a daughter, and her daughter is being trained up to be part of this dance thing. So anyway, I guess enough about that. That we need to help them succeed. I will say this. I did have the opportunity to coach baseball and with little kids, and I know Brian did as well. In fact, we used to coach against each other. And what we noticed as coaches was that, you know, in Little League, when kids are 11 and 10 and 12, there are some kids out there that probably shouldn't be out there, but somebody coaxed them into it, or maybe they thought, you know, I really want to try this baseball thing. And there were some that just couldn't hit a baseball to save their life. And so you'd pitch them a ball, you know, like try to throw a strike, and they'd just strike out every time. Even in practice, they just couldn't hit the ball. And finally, one day, it dawned on me that maybe we need a bigger ball. And so I brought in softballs. And I was throwing those at them, and they could kind of foul that off. They could get a little contact. And I noticed that as their bat made contact, it built their confidence. They began to feel better about themselves. They began to get the idea that they could actually hit the ball. And not only that, but if we would throw it under, no water there this time, Sean. If we would throw it underhand to them, they could hit it even easier. And so we started to do that. And as we did that, as we made them successful in these real little things, these baby steps, they became more confident. They became better batters. They could actually hit the ball. They felt like they could hit it. And then when they'd get in a game, they actually did better. And so this is what we need to do as fathers, is to put our kids in situations where they have success and build that confidence. Sometimes we're tempted to, well, we got to be tough on our kids, because they're going to be out there in the real world, and so we got to make it tough and challenging for them. Sometimes we can make it too challenging, and they get discouraged and they give up. So we put them in situations where they can succeed. All right, number 5. A good father is true to his wife. Malachi 2 says, "You cry out, 'Why doesn't the Lord accept my worship?' I'll tell you why. Because the Lord witnessed the vows between you and your wife that you made when you were young. But you have been unfaithful to her, though she remained your faithful partner, the wife of your marriage vows. Didn't the Lord make you one with your wife in body and spirit? You are His. And what does He want? Godly children from your union. So guard your heart and remain loyal to the wife of your youth." Now there's a quote that maybe you've heard, and it's really stuck with me over the years. And the quote is this, and it's to us as fathers: "The most important thing as a father that you can do for your children is to love their mother." Have you ever heard that? Yeah, I think we all have. And there's a lot of truth to that, and that's actually all I'm going to say about that point. I think it kind of says it all. A good father is true to his wife. Number 6, a good father protects his wife and children from harmful influences. All right, Mark 3:27. Jesus said, "No one can enter a strong man's house and plunder his goods unless he first binds the strong man, ties him up, and then he will plunder his house." And one of the things I think that Jesus was saying in this is, if the devil wants to get to your family, he's going to go through you as a father. And if he can get you distracted, if he can get you to be what do I want to say here? I was going to say loser, but I'm not going to say that.
You said it.
But if he can conquer you, then he's free to wreak havoc on your family. And so we as fathers, we are the strong men. We're supposed to be the strong one here. And so we have to guard our hearts so that the devil isn't able to wreak havoc in our families. 1 Peter 5 puts it this way: "Be sober, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. Resist him, standing firm in the faith." So this is especially true of us fathers, that the devil is out there, and he's not your friend. He goes about like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. And when he sees a father that's not doing his job, then he knows, okay, there's a target. There's that family that I maybe can work my magic in. You all know who Denzel Washington is? He's an actor. In my opinion, he's one of the best actors of our time, of our generation. He happens to be a black person. And he was doing an interview recently, and the interviewer was talking about all this uproar that our nation has been going through with suppression of black people. Anyway, the interviewer said, Denzel, do you think we've made any headway as far as black men being singled out for prison time? And here's what Denzel Washington said. I thought it was very interesting. Listen closely. I'm just going to read his response. Denzel said, I think it's more important to make headway in our own home, in our own house. By the time the system comes into play, the damage is done. They're not locking up 7-year-olds. And then he said, Google this title, Little Yummy. Little Yummy was an 11-year-old murderer, a black kid in Chicago. And then he was killed by a 14-year-old who is now 16 and doing a sentence in prison, a life sentence. Do you blame the system? Where was the father? It starts in the house. It starts in the home. And yeah, well, my father got locked up. Well, where was his father? Denzel went on to say, I did talk about my 3 closest friends growing up. One did 15 years in prison, one did 25, one did 28 years, this and that. I was the only one of the bunch that had a father in my life. My father was a pastor who was a gentleman and a good example, and they didn't. We can blame the system if we want, but they didn't lock any of us up at 7, and we were all doing enough to get locked up at 13. But my parents sent me in another direction. But they didn't have that. They didn't have anybody to help them, and they kept doing what they was doing. You see what he was saying there? See how important he talks about a father in the home? And a lot of the maladies that our society is facing could be solved if there was a father in the home. Amen. Yeah. Anyway, we could talk about that all day, but we won't. We got 2 more points here to quickly go over. A good father spends time with his wife and children. Genesis 2 says, And the Lord God said, It is not good that man should be alone. I will make him a helper comparable to him. Now, if you read Genesis chapter 1, on the first day, God created light. God said, let there be light, and there was light. And God saw that it was good, right? And the evening and the morning was the first day. And then on the second day, God created something else, and he said it was good. And every day, at the end of the day, when he created something, he said, this is good. But when you get to chapter 2, he said, this is not good. And what was it? That man should be alone. It's not good for man to be alone. Now, I think we could all attest to that. That men, on their own, behave badly, oftentimes. And so it's a good father spends time with his wife and children. If I were to mention different rock stars that you've heard about, would you say they led moral lives or immoral? Most of them immoral, right? Well, there's one rock star that doesn't fit that mold. Paul McCartney, in a recent interview, was asked what he would like to be remembered for. Looking back on all his fame and fortune, all the things that happened to him, he said, I want to be remembered as a father and a grandfather. And Paul and Linda McCartney were married for 28 years before she passed away. They never spent one night apart. And so he was a faithful father. He spent time with his wife and with his family. One wife came to me for counseling, this was years ago, and we were talking about this idea that it's not good for man to be alone. And she was having problems with her marriage, and part of the problem was that economy was tough, and there weren't a lot of jobs around this area. And so her husband had actually moved to another state so that he could take a job. And then their kids were in school here, and the plan was that she would reunite with him in the summer, and this was in the middle of winter, and then so the kids could finish out the school year. You've heard of that before, right? Well, it wasn't working out so well in their family. She began to have concerns that it wasn't too good for a man to be alone. He wasn't behaving very well. And so I told her about this concept. It's not good for a man to be alone. She got on the phone that night, called him and said, I'm pulling the kids out of school and we're moving down to where you are. And that marriage was saved because she had the willingness to do that. A good father spends time with his wife and children. And finally, a good father teaches his children. Deuteronomy 6 says, And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, and when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. Now, what this verse is saying is that as parents, and especially as fathers, we need to teach our children. We need to teach our children the ways of the Lord. You say, well, when can we do that? They're so busy all the time. When they get up in the morning, when they eat their meals, when you're sitting in your house, when they lie down to go to bed. It spells it out right here in Deuteronomy chapter 6. And when in our house, growing up, we had a Bible story book. And it was a book of stories in the Bible that were written that kids could understand. Because I know when I was a little kid, my great-grandmother bought our family, it was called the Bible storybook. And my mom and dad would read us these stories out of the Bible, and they were in kids' language that we could understand. And later on, I picked up that book myself, and I started reading it. And, you know, when you start reading the stories of the Bible, it's hard to put it down. And we've used this with our kids and our grandkids, and inevitably they want more and more and more. And finally you just have to say, okay, wait till tomorrow and we'll talk about this more. So, but I want to leave you with this thought. And when we first did that with our oldest son, he was just old enough to where we could start reading stories to him. And I had this Bible storybook, and it has pictures in it. And so we were kind of thumbing through the pictures of this storybook. And he said, wait a minute, Dad. He said, go back to that picture. I said, which one? He said, well, just go back. And so we started going back, and he said, that one. And I said, well, John, what do you see? And he said, well, I see a man, and he's bleeding. And I said, well, where is he? He says, he's on a piece of wood. And so I was able to explain to him that that man's name was Jesus, and that he loved us so much that he went to a cross, he bled, and he died for us. Of all the pictures of that Bible storybook, that was the one that struck him. And that is the one that strikes us. That is what Don was talking about when he said, I want you to focus on the cross. And we focus on the cross because this is where we get our salvation. This is where we are saved from our sin. And if you've never received Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, we want to give you that opportunity today.